Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on how to make credible environmental claims using LCA. LCA standing for Life Cycle Assessment. So before we start, a poll. We're going to immediately put you to action, and we would love to know what you think. How many environmental claims made by companies in Europe provide vague, misleading, or unfounded information? Let's go. Let's see. 62% is in the win. So let's see. So the winner here is 62% of environmental claims made by companies in Europe are vague, misleading, or have unfounded information. The good answer is 53%. So this was already a check if everybody had read the new report published by the EU. But if you want to have the poll away from your screen, you have to click on exit, by the way. All right. So that immediately brings us to the why are we here, of course. We are here because this is a problem. 53% of green claims have vague, misleading, or unfounded information. Now, and the rest of the numbers here aren't very nice to look at either. This is a result of a study performed by the European Parliament on, indeed, the claims that people make within Europe. And of course, the main reason also why we are here today is to prevent these kinds of things from happening in the future. So again, a little bit more context. I don't think anybody who subscribed to this webinar has not seen it. All the news lately has been full of it, greenwashing claims, but also news on new greenwashing legislation. Especially here on the right, we see the directive of the European Parliament on the new Green Claims Directive, which was released, very recently. And also here, environmental claims are being critiqued right now. And especially when it comes to data, of course, there's no foundation for your claim and credibility in that sense as well. So who are we? I am here today with my lovely colleague, Eva Leferink. Eva, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hi, Sazana. Hi, Ike. Hi, everyone. My name is Eva Leferink, and I'm an environmental specialist at Ecochain. And I help clients making and calculating their environmental footprint. So that's something that you can eventually use to back up your environmental claim.
Fantastic. And Eva, why is this an important topic for you?
For me, it's really important because I hear it a lot in the news, of course, but also for my clients that they would like to do it. Mm-hmm. And it's super important that when you do it, it's done correctly. So that's why we're here today.
Nice. And then there's another person in the call, Ike. Ike will help out with the Q&A. Hi, Ike.
Hi, everybody. I'm an environmental specialist, just same as Eva, and I will be collecting your questions that you might have. At the end of the webinar, we will come back to them, and I will read them out.
Nice. Thank you. All right. And I'm Zazala. I'm content manager at Ecochain. So I write all the content that we produce, our open content. And for the next 45, 50 minutes, we are going to talk about this very important topic. All right. So why listen to us? Well, Eva already said it, and Ike as well. Environmental footprinting runs through our veins. It's what we do at Ecochain for already more than 10 years, especially in the form of life cycle assessments. So why LCA? Why is this so important for claims? We're going to come back to that, of course, but also in the new Green Claims Directive from the EU, LCA is the foundation when it comes to getting environmental footprint data on your products. Without it, you won't be able to make any claim anymore. At Ecochain, we provide LCA software for companies to measure LCAs of their products themselves. We have two tools, Ecochain Mobius, which is really focusing on product LCAs and sustainable design and eco-design. And on the other hand, we have Ecochain Helix, which focuses on making large amounts of LCAs at the same time. So really for manufacturing sites as well. All right. Now, environmental claims. What is an environmental claim? I think that's pretty important to touch upon before we start the rest of the webinar. An environmental claim is actually also how the EU describes it, quite a broad concept, but it comes down to the core of this. You make a claim in any kind of way via a label or another type of communication in your marketing efforts or to a supplier or whoever is interested on how you are impacting the environment. Now, of course, in this, there are different types of claims. The ones that we will mostly be touching upon today are the B2C claims, so the business to customer claims, which is, of course, the one that have been in the news the most as they are most outspoken. So for example, I'm buying a product in the supermarket or somewhere else and I see, for example, here, the one from Oatly, a climate footprint on it. This is a claim, but mostly used in B2C context. On the right, we have an environmental product declaration, which is mostly used in B2B context. So if a supplier or another stakeholder is interested in a full report on my footprint, an EPD is a way to do that. So these two things are very important to know, and we are going to touch upon them today as Eva helps customers with both, which is great. So a credible environmental claim, what does it need? You will see this a lot in the upcoming months and years as the EU rolls out its legislation, not just the green claims legislation, but also the CSRD. Everything in the Green Deal plan from the EU is based on credible data. And here we see it even more that environmental data is the key to having a proper claim. But not just any environmental data. So step one to getting a credible environmental claim is getting credible environmental data. Step two is a lot of people, a lot of brands want to compare, of course, their products in a claim compared to somebody else. So you have to compare and benchmark correctly. Step three that Eva and I will go through today is that you also, of course, need to transparently communicate your claim with proof. Okay, Eva, are you ready? I think you are.
Definitely.
Great. So the first step is the key to any claim and incredibly important, credible environmental data. Now, there are a couple of aspects on getting that, and we've already told the people here a little bit more about LCA. I see here, make an LCA of your product. Eva, what does that mean?
So when you want to make an LCA of a product, which is important for your environmental data, I think we can go to the next slide for that.
Yes.
We also have a webinar for beginners about LCA, so I will run through this shortly. How does an LCA work? So what you first do is you want to measure and start with what do you want to measure? You set your goal and scope and what kind of life cycle do you want to take for this? So we have different ones you can choose for the whole life cycle from raw materials to waste, so cradle to grave. But you also only model the cradle to gate, to the factory gate. What do you need for that? You need different kinds of data. Your data input, as you see below, is, for example, energy use, emissions, waste, purchase raw materials, transportation, everything that belongs to your functional unit, so what you actually want to measure. Then you need life cycle assessment methods and software. So for example, Mobius or Helix, and then you can get your results. And your results, they are the environmental footprint. And you have a lot of impact categories, which you can see at the right. And you can interpret these results and then eventually use them to back up your claim.
Exactly. And so there are 15 plus impact categories. Now, of course, we know that the classic claim a lot of companies make is the carbon footprint, but you could, for example, then also put it on water scarcity.
Definitely. So choose the ones that are important for you and for your sector.
Okay, so the first thing we need is a life cycle assessment according to the correct LCA norms and standards. Now, this is, of course, very important in getting credible environmental data. Could you elaborate on these norms and standards, Eva?
Yes, of course. So as you see here at the right bottom, you see the ISO 14040 and 14044, and those are the two ISO norms that you should always follow. So those are guidelines, principles, a framework in which you stand there that you need to follow some rules. And you can first read these guidelines when you want to start with making a life cycle assessment. And then is it the best way to see what does your sector do? So we have different kinds of standards. For example, the European construction sector has the standard, the EN 15804 plus A2. And if you're in the European construction sector, it's important that you follow that specific standard, because then you can actually compare and measure in the right way.
Exactly. So an LCA norm and standard, it already says it. It's the standard for an LCA, which is why it's something you really cannot skip But luckily, a lot of software tools have these options, of course, already in them that you can choose the right standard and method. Okay, so we want to make a life cycle assessment. We've decided on that. We know who we want to do it for and what we want to do it on. We are following the correct norms and standards. Now it comes to the data part. You already briefly touched upon that, Eva. And here we have used primary data, or at least as much as possible. Could you explain what is primary data and what then is another kind of data? And why is it so important that this is part of your claim, if you have it?
Yeah, so we have primary and secondary data, and primary data is measured by yourself. It's data of your actual product. So we have two sorts. You can measure it with, for example, the electricity use in your factory, the amount that you need for 1 kilogram of textile fabric with sewing. So that is primary data. But what you can also have is an EPD or an LCA of your raw material. So you could make a wooden bench, and the wood you are buying it from a certain supplier, and this supplier already made an LCA, and this information you can use in your own LCA again. And that is, of course, the preferred way, because then you get really something that is as accurate as possible and it looks like the reality. But we also have secondary data, and secondary data is more general. There are data points in our databases, and that's definitely something that is not wrong. There are good data points, but it's more general. So if you want to go for the most realistic view, you get primary data as much as possible, and then secondary data to fill out the gaps. But of course, when you use secondary data, you always need to choose your worst case scenario. And that means if you do not know it for sure, you choose the worst case because you do not want to have yourself in a preferred way and you want to avoid the greenwashing part.
Exactly.
What's also really important to mention is that whenever you think, I do not have enough primary data, that's not a problem. We always say start with secondary data and try to see where are your hotspots. Sometimes we see that the hotspot is really in a certain material, and then we say, okay, that's the perfect start to collect primary data on. So do not let it scare you if you do not have your primary data yet. It's an iterative process, and within the years, it will probably get better and everyone is hopefully going to collect their data. So eventually we'll have more primary data.
Yeah. So indeed, what Eva says, just a quick recap, you can have a credible environmental claim based on secondary data, but in general, your LCA becomes more accurate, of course, if you use primary data. So we always advise our customers as well to gather this already, or when you start out with your process, to already start thinking about how the timeline in which you want to gather it, because indeed, it is an iterative process. This secondary data, where do we get this from? Where can we find this?
Yeah, so we can find this in our database. We have multiple databases, such as the Nationale Milieu database. This one is really specific for the Dutch sector, mostly construction. But we also have Ecoinvent, and Ecoinvent is a non-profit organization in Switzerland, and they have a lot of scientific research, a lot of small LCAs. And those small LCAs are general data points that you can also use, and those are available in our tools.
Amazing. All right. So primary data, secondary data, got it. Now, the last step here, an option you can do to even, make your results look even more credible is verifying your LCA. How does that work?
Yeah. So if you choose to verify your LCA, mainly that is something that you start with. So if you want to make an LCA, it's also good to directly think of, do I want to verify it? When you want to do this, you are going to write a report. We can do that together, or you can do that by yourself, or we can do that for you about your LCA. And in this report, it is stated what assumptions did you make, what background reference did you use, what primary data did you use, what is your goal, what is your scope, everything around your LCA. Then we are going to get a third-party auditor involved, and this auditor is going to check if your model and assumptions are done correct and are correct. Then if that is so, again, it's an iterative process. Sometimes we need to change a lot. Sometimes the model is already correct. We get a stamp, you get a stamp that the LCA is verified. Then you can also see in between brackets the EPD. An EPD is an environmental product declaration. And we say that an EPD, in short, is a summary of your LCA without any data that you cannot share with your competitors or clients. There's no sensitive data involved in an EPD. So this is something that people can do who would really like to show others. I did an LCA and these are my results and this is what I plan.
Exactly. Great. So a summary, basically, of course, of your LCA. All right. So before we go to the next topic, quick roundup. Whether you are making a B2C claim or a B2B claim, lifecycle assessment is always the starting point. And only in the next steps or in certain nuances in how you want to communicate, of course, that's where it differs. But when it comes to the foundational data you need for any kind of claim, lifecycle assessment is the way to go. Okay, on to the next step. Comparing. Yes, this is a big thing, of course. We see it everywhere. You want to stand out. I'm a company that I'm doing what I believe is great work, and I want to compare myself to others to also show that, right? That people should choose me over a competitor because my impact is better. Benchmarking, same thing. Eva, why is it so important that we discuss this?
So it's really important because this is often done not in the correct way. It's really easy to see a number and directly think, that is the impact. That's a environmental impact of the market, of a product. And without knowing what are the assumptions, what is the method used. So it's really important that before you start comparing and benchmarking, that you know what you are doing. So that's why we want to elaborate on this one a bit more.
Exactly. And no, I know that you are very passionate about this topic. So let's get started right away. Benchmarking, comparing correctly. The first point I see here says use the exact same methodology, functional unit, assumptions, and context. Why is that so important, Eva?
So you definitely want to compare apples with apples and pears with pears. For example, the methodology, if you want to have the methodology of the Dutch construction sector or of the European construction sector, there are different ways in how they treat certain things. So if you use the same methodology, you will treat the same things in the same way. And also for the functional unit, a functional unit could, for example, be one product, but it can also be 1 kilogram of your product or 1 square meters of your product. So you can definitely already guess if you're comparing 1 square meters with 1 kilogram, you're comparing two different things. So probably the impact of one of those two would be higher. Yeah, and it's not what you want. You want to compare 1 square meters with 1 square meters. And then again, for the assumptions, if you do not know transportation distances, we have some certain default values, such as 50 kilometers to go to a waste plant. But if you have another LCA that uses 250 kilometers, then you would say, okay, we're making different assumptions here. And most certainly, the LCA with 250 kilometers would have a higher impact. And that is not something that you want if you're going to compare something.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, of course. And it really ties in with the next point that we have here, which is about this average product. So the product that you're comparing to, how do I make that product?
Yeah, so there are multiple ways in how you can make that average product. The first example is based on existing research. We have a client and they're producing jeans and they found a lot of research online that certain brands put online there. And that's how they try to model an average product. What you must make sure is that you always communicate how did you build up this average product? Because often people want to show that they are doing better, but you really want to show is that your average product is modeled in the correct way and your own product is modeled in the correct way as well. So search for research, search for LCAs, but definitely make sure that you also follow point A with the exact same methodology, functional unit, and assumptions.
Yeah.
What is better or perhaps more easy to do is in our Mobius tool, we also have a scenario function so you can copy your product and you can change some certain variables of your product. a good example of this is that we have a client and they use a lot of bamboo in their products. And they wanted to see what happens if we change around bamboo for normal cotton, for conventional cotton.
Yeah.
So they copied their products, changed variables, also the gray electricity mix, for example, instead of solar. And they thought, okay, what happens? And then they communicate. We changed a cotton t-shirt and a bamboo t-shirt. We compared those two next to each other and we only changed one variable. And then you definitely know for sure you use the same methodology, functional unit and assumptions.
Yeah.
And a third, products from previous years. You, of course, know what you modeled, what you produced a couple of years ago. One of our clients, they make working shoes. They are going to compare their working shoes in 2016 with 2022 to see what did they do better or different over the years. And this is a great way not only to see how did I do better, but also to make plans for the future.
Yeah. So what I'm getting here is that if you want to compare with an external product, really try to look for parties that have already published LCAs and also be honest about this, because I know that the customer you're talking about, they indeed found a couple of frontrunners who published an LCA on their jeans and they explicitly said, it's very difficult for us to benchmark. But hey, we found this data and based on that, we can at least say this. Or indeed compare it to your own product in a worst case scenario in a way, or switch certain parameters, or compare your progress from the years before. Okay, this average product, tricky. How can a product category rule help, if there is one? What is a PCR in the first place?
So PCR, product category rules, are a set of guidelines and rules on how to calculate these certain products. Big one in the Netherlands is the one of asphalt. And there it stands, what kind of reference do I need to use? What kind of background do I want to use? What kind of input? And this helps with setting some guidelines in how can I calculate my product in the correct way. Something that the asphalt sector also did is making a branch report. And in this branch report, they've modeled averages. So it's average asphalt mixtures, and other asphalt manufacturers can compare their mixtures to this branch report. And this is, of course, great because the data comes from averages from the branch. So this is really how you can compare yourself to the market. And otherwise, this gets super difficult. So if you want to start comparing something to the market, it might be great to look for a PCR and either start with your own data yourself and together with a couple of more people from the branch, or look for the PCR.
Yeah. Now, I know that a lot of industries aren't lucky enough to have a PCR yet, but we also know that, of course, the EU is trying to fix that. The EU is trying to fix a lot these days, which is great, with the PEF, so the Product Environmental Footprint Method. And in here, they also create PEF category rules, which is their attempt to unite Europe in a way that you would be able to indeed compare your product to another that is calculated in the exact same methodology, functional unit assumptions. And even what we've seen, the plans are to make indeed benchmark products in these PEF product category rules. So let's hope that the EU is going to, rush that a bit, because indeed, as we see here, it's so important that, of course, these rules and these benchmark values are there. Okay, great. On to the last point. Transparently communicate with proof. I don't think this needs a lot of elaboration, Eva, but why is this, again, so incredibly important to do in making a claim?
So, as we already spoke about, there are various different ways in how you can make a claim and how you can compare something. And it's important that people know what did you exactly do so that they understand it in the correct way and aren't guessing what you did. So that's why transparently communicating with proof is the main thing, the main message from today.
Exactly. And just a quick throwback to what we said in the beginning as well. Also, this new Green Claims Directive from the EU. One of the top things in criteria that are going to be part of these assessments for companies who are going to make claims is indeed, do you have credible environmental data to back up your proof? And is this also something that they can assess from your claim? And this is where the communication part, of course, comes in, if you maybe have data, but you don't communicate it properly, or you communicate it differently than what is in your LCA report, things get a little bit gray. So how can we fix that? We have, again, 4 great points. And here, environmental claims need to be accessible. Accessible. What do we mean with that, Eva?
Yeah, so accessibility means that you need to find what are the things that you base your life cycle assessment on and your claim on. So, for example, you see the packaging of Oatly with so many kilograms of CO2 equivalent. But how did they calculate everything? What is the background of it? So, what we always say to our clients is put a link with it, put a QR code with it, so that people really can read that the information is accessible, what you exactly did. Another good point is making a report. Always follow the reporting standards so that it's also accessible for everyone who is going to read it. Make sure that if someone wants to read it, they can find everything.
Exactly. And I think an important remark here is as well that, again, coming back to this Green Claims Directive, this is actually one of the mandatory points when the EU assesses your claim in the future, so that you really have either a QR code or a link or somewhere that allows people to immediately go to the full story, and that it becomes indeed accessible for a consumer or another stakeholder to really read upon all the details behind your claim. This really ties in, you already said it, with the next point, understandable. Eva, yeah, you and I, we talk about LCA and all these terms all the time. Why is it so important that we don't do that too much in the claims?
So, I think if someone is really deep into some sort of subject, that they're going to use jargon a lot. So jargon means that you use quite a lot of difficult words, or the LCA, like the short terms for it. And it's important to keep it simple, that everyone understands what is it. So you have different kinds of levels and different kinds of readers. Not everyone is an environmental specialist. So also make sure you take that into account with communicating. And try to put yourself in the shoes of your stakeholders and let it read to someone who might be your mother or might be your next door neighbor that has a really different level in the environmental knowledge than you have. And then you can make sure that it's understandable for everyone.
Yeah. And I believe you also have a really great example of this, one of our customers.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we're really proud of this example. And this is a customer, and they make refurbished laptops, and they communicate a really small number on their website with this much of kilograms of CO2 equivalent is our refurbished laptop. But then for the people that want to know more, they can click on that number, and then they get to the page where everyone can see how did they calculate it and what did they exactly do. They're really open in what they did. They're also not afraid to tell where they made assumptions, because that's important. In every calculation, you are going to make assumptions, and you better be transparent about it. And then again, if you want to know even more of that, you can click even further to their sustainability page. And that, of course, ties in together with all those different accessibility, understandable, relevant, and transparent. This is something they're really doing well.
Yeah. No, I know who you're talking about, and I know why we're so proud. Exactly. So I think a really interesting thing here is that already before you, of course, start making an LCA, when you think of your goal and your audience, you also need to think, okay, what do they want to hear? What kind of level of knowledge do they have? For example, if it's a customer who's buying my Oatly, or is it someone who, is in a supply chain and has to deal with all these things every day? And so even for multiple readers, if you have them, make different kinds of information. Indeed, start with just a carbon footprint, then a story. That's a little bit easier. And if people really want to dive in, make sure that indeed the full LCA report or sustainability report is always accessible and understandable. I think it will make everybody's life a lot easier. Relevant. I mean, it's very important, of course, that our environmental claims are relevant. What do we mean exactly with this?
Yeah, so of course it's relevant that you have your environmental claim and with a lot of background information, but not all information is as relevant for your sector of your product.
Yeah.
So we have over 15 impact categories, and I think not every impact category is as important as the other is. So, for example, in the textile industry, we see that water depletion is a really important impact category. So please make sure that you're going to report on this one. But it might not be as relevant for the refurbished laptops. They might choose more for the minerals and metals.
Yeah.
So make sure to pick the right ones that are relevant for your stakeholders.
Exactly. Don't splurge all impact categories on them. But in your first claim, I think the most important part of your communication efforts, make sure that indeed you bring this focus and you talk about what's important for your stakeholders and the people you're making this claim to. But indeed, always make sure that if they wanted to read on, the full report is accessible and understandable. We're getting there. The last point, transparent.
Yeah.
Why do environmental claims need to be transparent, Eva?
Yeah, you really do not want to leave people guessing or thinking that it's a fake claim. So you need to make it transparent and back everything that you did up with the sources. So what are the data sources that you use? What are the assumption sources that you use? I think it's really important to just keep honest here in what you exactly did so that people know and can trust you in how did you do it.
Yeah. And I think an important thing here to add is that, of course, not every calculation or your first calculation might be the number or the results that you or immediately want. But does sustainability happen overnight, Eva?
No, definitely not. And we see that calculations get better every year. As I already mentioned, people are getting more primary data, with every year. So it doesn't happen overnight. Companies do not go from A to Z in 1 year. So make sure that if you make a calculation, also state in what are your future plans. And you can definitely also be honest about what is not going perfect yet. And I think we need to embrace the yet and that we just have to keep on trying to do our best with each other.
Exactly. I think that's a great final note on the 3 steps to get a credible environmental claim. So, quick recap. Step 1, make a proper life cycle assessment. And we've gone through it. So, do a life cycle assessment according to the correct ISO norms and to the LCA standards and methods that are applicable for you. There's always people who can help you if you're not yet ready or you just can't figure out which methods. Make sure that you use as much primary data as possible, but it's okay if you don't have that in the start yet. Just state that you use this kind of data and what your plans are for the future. And then the second one was, of course, if you benchmark, make sure that you use the exact same methodology, assumptions, context, everything, or compare it to yourself, which is always great. And the third part, transparently communicate with proof. Make sure that everybody can find everything you've done, that you're transparent about it, and that you don't use jargon all the time and make decisions in what's important and what's not important. Good recap?
Great recap.
Great. All right. Then we're going towards the questions soon. Before we do that, of course, LCA, as we said, is the foundation of all kinds of claims. It's already the case. And even in the new directive, your GHG or your carbon footprint isn't enough anymore. They want more environmental impact categories. And that's why LCA is the way to go. You can start making your first LCA already for free in our 14-day free Mobius trial and see if it fits you and have a lot of fun, especially. So go to our website, to our Mobius page, and you can start your free trial there without any payment necessary. And of course, keep yourself informed. As we know, LCA is a lot. As Eva said, we talk about it every day, but a lot of people don't, and it's very overwhelming. We want to make sure that it's less overwhelming with these webinars, but also by signing up for the webinar, you subscribe to our biweekly newsletter in which we share so many tips. Of course, you can opt out anytime you want, but then at least you know what kind of information you're getting in your inbox. And if you want to stay up to date with us, please follow us on LinkedIn, of course, where we share even more tips from Eva and Ike, who has been working very hard to go through. I see a lot of questions that have come in, so let's answer them. Ike.
Thank you. Yeah, you are all very interested and invested in this topic. So I grouped them a bit together because otherwise it's just too much. But Eva, can you tell us more about what's the difference between EPD and LCA? And do you have to get it verified?
So LCA, the life cycle assessment, is everything that you're going to collect your data on, and you're going to make a life cycle assessment. And here out of you get your environmental footprint. And you do not have to get that verified. This is also something that you can do without verification. And we always say that without verification, it's really important that you use it internally. And if you really would like to spread it, then it's a good thing to verify it, because verified results are just checked and looked at with a third party as well. Then for an EPD, Environmental Product Declaration, you need to make an LCA. So LCA is the start of it. Then you can go to the EPD. For an EPD, you need to choose what kind of EPD you want. We have different EPD program operators. And with these program operators, different rules. So when you start with LCAs, it might be good to already think about, what do I want to do in the end? What is my goal for this? Because an EPD and a platform will also get you into different choices for your LCA. An EPD is always verified. So this cannot be done without verification.
Thank you, Eva. I think that's a very nice answer. And let's see, there's another question. What if you have no one to compare your data to? What if you're the first in the sector or industry that is doing an LCA and that you cannot find anything to compare it to?
So first of all, you're doing great. I mean, if you're the first one to start, that's great. Someone has to start. So we definitely want to help you with that. What we say is that you can start building your average product. So perhaps you have a product and you have a hairdryer. In your hairdryer production facility is running on solar electricity, and you would really like to compare it to the more average product. In your average product, you can make a copy of that one, of your product, and build the average product with then, for example, gray electricity, or perhaps you're using recycled materials. You can then, in your average product, use virgin materials, and the copy of your product with the averages is always secondary data that is available in the tool in our database.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question. What if I have an LCA and I want to prepare an environmental claim of an average product? I have multiple production sites. Can I then do it for only one location, an average product, or can I create an average product of all the production locations?
You can actually do both. It might both be an option, whatever you would like to compare it to. So if you make an average of one production site, I think that might be easier because you have less data to make an average of, but you can definitely do both. So what do you want with it in the end? And I think it's really important that if you're going to make this average product and are going to communicate it to the public, that you state that you only made an average out of this one production location, or that you did it with all of your production locations. So if you're producing in the same way, but then only in a different country, I think it might be good to just make one average product. But if you're producing in a totally different way, it might be really hard to make an average of your product. So think of where do I want to communicate it with, and with who, and be transparent in what you exactly did.
Okay, thanks. And then a question I see coming back a lot is, can you take into account carbon sequestration or offsetting in your LCA?
No, that's not something that you can take into account. You need to take into account what happens in your life cycle, and carbon offsetting is something that isn't allowed in life cycle assessments. The carbon neutrality claim is also something that is not supported by the EU, and that's why the life cycle assessments are also not taking that into account. So it's great that you want to carbon offset something, but often people get distracted by it and then focus more on the offsetting than on actually trying to make your environmental footprint better. So great that you're offsetting, but you cannot use it in the LCAs. And if you're offsetting, please do not get distracted by it and try to focus on how can you do better with your product, with your organization.
Great. That's a great message. And what if you're comparing something to, for example, in your own production facility, two products or to an external party, and you see these different types of indicators, for example, CO2 emissions or water use. But for example, for the one product, water use is higher, but CO2 is lower than the other product. How do you compare that? How do you compare all the indicators?
Yeah, so it's difficult then to compare all the different indicators, which you can definitely put them together. If you use the same method, same functional unit, same assumptions, then you can put them next to each other. I think a great example is for polyester and cotton. They are scoring different in different indicators. So that's why we also say it's important to not only look at your carbon footprint, but look broader. One product might be scoring really well on water usage or water depletion, and the other might not. But then another category might be really different. So for polyester and cotton, this is a great example in what are you looking at and how can it be better? So use both categories then to communicate because it is different.
Yeah, it's very complex, but it's good to help you interpret those. Let's see. Yeah, also some questions came up about LCA and the relation to the PEF-CR. Is it the same or how can you see them together?
Yeah, so the PEF and the LCRs are the same as the PEF, as that you also are going to focus on life cycle assessment calculations. And the PEF are really specific for the European Union. You also have the EF 3.0, and that's a method that you can use and for the European Union.
Super, thanks. And I also see some specific questions. I'm just going to pull out one. You have always verified EPD for the construction sector in the Netherlands. Very specific. You have set A1 indicators and set A2 indicators. How can you compare those two together? Can you?
Yeah, you cannot compare them because they're different indicators. And that's again really important that you use both indicators and that you're not comparing them, but you need to communicate them both at this certain moment. This is also a bit of an obstacle sometimes because the Dutch construction sector asks for toxicities, but in Europe, they do not ask for toxicities. So that's why we can sometimes not use an EPD that is European for a Dutch person, for a Dutch company or product. So yeah, that's an obstacle that is a bit difficult, but please do not compare the set 1 with set 2 because they are different.
Yeah, that's a really insightful answer. So that's also highlighting how difficult it is to find your way through all the different methods, LCA standards, also different types of indicators. I saw questions about that in the chat. So yeah, all the question askers, it's indeed a very detailed topic. And also, you have to be very transparent what you're doing. So also mention the method, mention the indicators, because otherwise the reader cannot compare it properly.
Yeah, what might be good to add as well is that we have an article about input categories and that some of our clients are also just asking us like, hey, do you please want to read with me? I've stated this. Am I stating this correctly? Am I making the right comparison? So we are always there to help them to make the good claim, to make the valid claim so that our clients, can communicate the right things.
Yes. And what can you say about environmental labels, so business to consumer? Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different labels, and we always hope that labels are backed up by good data. We know that there are over 200, at least that's what I read in the last documents of the EU, and these labels are sometimes not backed up by data, and then we can definitely not support them because we think it's important that you are credible and that you make the right calculations for these labels. Yeah, so I think that's the main message here. Try, if you want to put a label on your product, that is backed up with the right data and right background information.
Super. I think we have all the question topics indeed. We have them answered now for a bit, because otherwise we will go into much more detail.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Ike, for asking all the questions, and everybody who is, of course, watching the webinar. Thank you for also asking them. All right, so we're at the end of this webinar. Eva, thank you, of course, for sharing all your knowledge and your tips and the shout outs to our amazing customers. Ike, thank you so much for going through all the questions. As Eva and Ike both already said, we have a lot of content on our website that is open. If you go to our menu, you will find the LCA Hub. This is completely structured in everything that we have on LCA. You will find something at least there. So feel free to do that. And you can start your free Mobius trial as well. Or feel free to reach out to us anytime that you want on this important topic. Thank you, ladies. And thank you to everybody. Bye-bye.